the feature set for every company is different. And usually that is developed over time. And then the next time you see a customer that has it, it's just developed in the platform. Yeah. And what we're seeing now with this platform shift is enterprises still need all of that customization. They need all of the feature set, but it doesn't exist in the software and it doesn't exist anywhere. And so that's the value of this forward deployed motion, is that you can just customize and build it.
Ben Scharfstein, thanks for joining the pod. Ben is the head of product for the enterprise application business at Scale. So excited to have you on, man. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
It's going to be super fun. The applications product at Scale is one of the best kept secrets in Silicon Valley. Maybe just dive a little bit into like what you guys are doing and a little bit behind that part of the company.
So, most people probably know Scale for our data labeling business. Internally, we call it the Gen AI business, where we work with the foundation models to give them data that will move forward model progress.
Yeah, small acquisition that happened.
There was some stuff that happened recently.
Some things.
That's kind of what Scale is known for. But the other half of our business is the application business. In applications, we work with governments and Fortune 500s to build agents that change their companies and bring them into the future. So we take those learnings from what we do with the foundation model companies and bring that into the enterprise and to leading governments. And the business has changed a bunch. There's been an enterprise team at Scale for a long time, but really just in the past 12 to 18 months has it really taken off as something that's found kind of product market fit. Enterprises are finally ready to build agents, to adopt AI, and to kind of transform their business over time.
Yeah. And maybe you just say a little bit more about like what you guys are actually delivering to these enterprises. Like, is this a product that you guys have? Are you going in and doing different types of work? Like, what does this actually mean, this enterprise product?
In the end of the day, what we're trying to solve is their problems. And the world is changing so much that there's not one stable product that we deliver. Yeah. So we have something called the Scale Gen AI platform, which is kind of an LLM ops tool that helps us build and deploy product. And then we have forward deployed engineers, product managers, and machine learning engineers that embed deeply with the customer and understand their problem, build full stack applications. A lot of it is custom. And then we bring that back into our platform. And we're trying to bring more and more back over time, but it's very much kind of custom what they need. That's because the industry is changing a lot. Every day it changes. GPT-5 comes out and it's different than it was 3 months ago. And so what we need to actually build in product changes. And so we've just said, the best thing to do is just build exactly what they need.
It's interesting. Like, it's almost as if like these big enterprises, they're saying, hey, like we want AI. Like we don't know exactly where to turn. And so you guys kind of go out there and you basically bring these AI solutions to these large enterprises. Like, what do you think maybe changed? Like, does it feel a little bit different? Because, when I talk to you, I talk to other people around that business and others like it. It seems like the rate of change or the rate of growth of those products is just like astronomical. Like, I think, maybe you guys talk about publicly it being a 9-figure business now. And it's, just a short period of time ago, it was very, very small. Like, what do you think changed with that backdrop?
I think that people historically were excited by AI. The C-suite was like, we need to have AI after ChatGPT came out, and people saw how powerful it was. But in terms of actually implementing the AI inside of their business, they were very, very early on. Yeah. And I would say it was probably like an 18-month lag between what you see on Twitter and what's the state of the art and what is actually working in enterprises. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is it's not because of model capabilities. It's because of change management, and it's because of integrations, oftentimes with data, and also just kind of understanding like what is the UX, what's the paradigm, the security, all of those types of things, and of course, model capabilities. Yeah. So when I joined Scale, about a year ago, we were seeing pilots, we were seeing proof of concept, we wanted to prove value, but we were not seeing the type of adoption that we are seeing today. Yeah. And what we would talk about in kind of our first meetings with customers is, hey, you need to cross the chasm from you have a bunch of pilots, but you can't get them to production. Yeah. And now what we're seeing is, hey, you actually have a bunch of things in production, but we want to really dramatically expand those capabilities. We want to solve bigger and bigger problems. Yeah. And I think now that enterprises are seeing what's possible in their peer set, they're seeing what they can kind of internally do, what the promise is. They're realizing, oh my God, we really need to accelerate these capabilities. We need to attack every part of our business with AI. Yeah. And they, look to partners like Scale and to many others. There's these kind of vertically integrated, whether it's Harvey, Decagon, Sierra, and all those people as well, to say, come solve our problems. We actually see the promise now, and then we can make it real. And we're just kind of at the beginning of that implementation of these things are going out to their customers, they're using them internally, they're actually seeing the value, and then they're doubling down.
I actually love that you brought up some of those companies, obviously very exciting businesses, but it almost feels like they're like two ends of the spectrum, right? There's like what you guys are doing, at least the way that I understand it. And then there's these like vertical specific AI businesses that are kind of like, one vertical and they're trying to productize it. Maybe just like talk a little bit about the trade-offs when you have each one of these approaches, because I think right now, obviously the AI businesses are very hot, but the like idea of an AI services firm is like, it's all of a sudden it's everywhere. Yeah. And I think people are probably underestimating how hard that is to do. So maybe just talk a little bit about the trade-offs between those two and how you guys navigate it on the product side.
I think both can work.
Yep.
I'll come say that. I think there's
well, one is very, very, very clearly working.
Yeah. Our view, we have the benefit of working with some of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah.
And these are companies kind of the top of every single industry. So like telco, banking, insurance, healthcare, you name it. We're working with the number 1, 2, and 3 in those industries. Yeah. And for those companies, they actually don't want the average of their peers. They don't want, the thing that everyone else is getting, what's in distribution for the models. They don't want what's been productized for everyone else because they have an advantage, a secret sauce that has made them special over time. And oftentimes they have distribution with customers. They have more data than other people. Yeah. They may have some internal processes that they want to capture inside of their AI, which is, can capture in the model, can capture in the agent, can capture in the prompts. Like there's a bunch of different ways that you can capture that. And by working with scale, we actually customize it. And this is where the forward deployed engineering motion is really important, is like we can actually capture that nuance and their unique advantage and bring it into the products and processes that we build for them. The benefit, obviously, of doing the vertical AI motion is, you can productize things quicker. Yep. And so what we do is we say, how do we go 1 to 2 layers down on productization? We don't have something out of the box. Yeah. We don't go and say, hey, we have a customer support agent. But we do say, hey, we spent a lot of time building agents that look like a customer support agent. And you have a lot of different nuance in your company that makes your customer support different than what everyone else needs. Yeah. And maybe it's actually involved with sales and it's involved with lifecycle, management around churn or something like that. And those types of problems, people come to scale and really want to kind of customize and build like a state-of-the-art solution for the leading enterprise there.
Do you think that the way that you're able to talking about going down those 2 levels and then trying to productize that experience, do you think that the way that work is now delivered is changing in any way? Because, I think historically you would have looked at a business like this and said, okay, it's probably going to grow fairly linearly with headcount, right? Because you need a new person to deliver this new experience every time you sign a new customer, which is why obviously everyone's always like software much more than this model. But clearly you guys are scaling in a way that kind of defies that traditional logic. So what do you think's changed maybe about the way that you can kind of deliver this very hands-on services-led approach?
I think there's always been an opportunity to take the kind of services-led approach and bring software into it. And we've seen Palantir do this for the past decade. Yeah. And people have always said, Palantir is a bad business. Now people are realizing maybe Palantir is a very high growth, amazing business, which I think it is. I think what we see is how do we build the AI native version of that? Yeah. And what we're trying to do with our customers is say, how do you augment and automate knowledge work? That's the core thing that we do. And we are also knowledge workers in as much as we are building these custom solutions. And so we're asking ourselves the same question and bringing those kind of insights into the product and platform as well. So things that previously would have had to been done by a data engineer, for example, say, how do we build an agent that does data engineering, right? If you want to build, a semantic layer, which is kind of critical for a lot of building these applications, okay, maybe we can have a data engineer agent go in and understand that. Maybe it can do the user interviews with our customers, with the business owners, and then understand how the data relates. And those are things that 2 years ago were not possible. Yeah. I actually tried to do this 2 years ago at the startup. Yeah. It wasn't possible. And now it really is. The capabilities have really expanded, integrations, trust, all of those things have made that possible. And we invest a lot in how do we reinvent our work and how do we build our software in a way that is agent native. One of the things that we really believe is the cost of writing software is going to zero. Yeah. In that world, first of all, you want to build all of your tooling so that agents can write the code and use your tooling. And then also you say, hey, we're not going to build things in this way that is over optimizing for the future. We're going to say the future is unknown and we can always rebuild it. But let's solve the most important problems now and use coding agents and all of those things to solve those problems.
And if you think about the last kind of big platform shift, a very similar kind of dynamic played out where it felt like, okay, everyone realized there was this opportunity to bring like this new fire to large enterprises, right? It feels like that's what's happening right now. There's AI, enterprises really want it. So it's like, how do I now get that to the enterprise? What pieces of advice do you have for the companies that maybe don't look exactly like Scale, right? But maybe they're more in that vertical camp? And maybe to make their vertical experience work, they need to do elements of what you guys are now doing. Would love to maybe hear a little bit of tactical guidance for those businesses and like what you may have learned from the last year of doing this.
Yeah. I think that this moment of the platform shift is really important because it used to be, or like when you're in a late stage of a platform, the incumbents are very robust and they bring on systems integrators, or you internally within your company configure the tooling. So if you think about, a Salesforce, right? Everything exists within Salesforce. It just needs to be configured.
Right.
And the software just in general, SaaS is kind of late stage and all the competitor set have a lot of robust features.
Yeah.
And where we're moving in AI is that we're not trying to replace software. We're trying to augment or automate human work. What that means is it doesn't exist today in software. There aren't competitors. There's not a competitor today. Just take the example of customer support. There's not something that 5 years ago did it automatically, right? It was a person that did it automatically. And so there are a bunch of custom things that every software business needs to build to work within an enterprise, whether that's security or data integrations or permissions or RBAC, all those types of things. The feature set for every company is different. And usually that is developed over time. And then the next time you see a customer that has it, it's just developed in the platform. Yeah. And what we're seeing now with this platform shift is enterprises still need all of that customization. They need all of the feature set. But it doesn't exist in the software and it doesn't exist anywhere. And so that's the value of this forward deployed motion, is that you can just customize and build it. And the key is that it should be the customization and a wedge into installing your software that is durable over time. Yeah. It's not worth just doing this as, there may be great consulting businesses to build, but that's not, the pot of gold. The real value is, hey, only 20% of the repeatable stuff exists today, but we're going to go solve the problem of a Fortune 10 company. We're going to do a ton of it custom. It may not even be built back into the platform yet, but over time, we're going to make the platform do more and more and more, or the software do more and more and more, and build that wedge, become a trusted partner with them, expand, stay very agile to solve their problems as they evolve and as the capabilities evolve, and make sure that you are capturing data. I think that's the key thing, is you want to become a system of record, system of work, and eventually become a system of intelligence where you actually do the work.
I think that's actually maybe a really interesting point to tease out a little bit more, because right now it's like, everyone seems to be focused obviously on like, what is the moat now with like everything that's changing so fast? Like, how do you see this playing out for these businesses that are going in and trying to capture new workflows? Like, how do you think about that within the context of Scale? And then as, maybe a vertical specific startup, like how do you think about going and capturing, something that can lead to a moat over time?
I think the 7 powers from Hamilton Helmer are like a, classic business framework way of thinking about moats. And they haven't changed.
Yep.
And if there's an 8th, that'll be interesting. But, network effects and scale economies, like all of the kind of 7 powers are still true. Interestingly, software was never a moat. It was never something that, at least, he thought was leading to differentiated returns. I think that's still true, which is that, the software itself is not a moat. So the most obvious one for most of these things is network effects. Yep. And oftentimes that comes from data. And it's also switching costs. Yeah. And so if you can embed into a workflow or create a tool that generates new data, it's very difficult to become a system of record, but there is a bunch of new data being generated by Gen AI, by the tools that people use. And if you can wedge into that and then make that data critical to other business users in the in the company, then I think you have a very durable advantage. And it's hard, it's hard to switch. We don't, try to make ourselves hard to switch. Yeah. What we try to do is make ourselves critical and really solve problems such that it's like such a no-brainer. And then over time, become more and more critical and build more and more of a data platform so that we're just more useful for the company. Yeah. And I think the type of data that we really focus on is maybe different than what, these vertical AI companies focus on, but where we really think our advantage, what we've done for the past decade at Scale, is we convert human knowledge into data that can be used to build AI. Yep. And that is a new type of data that doesn't exist. It's the standard operating procedure of how to do a job. And if you think about it in our data business, that's always what we've done. We have contributors, 100,000 plus contributors around the world that do these tasks. And then we work with the labs to turn that into AI-ready data.
Yep.
And we're doing the same thing with enterprises. The process is a little bit different. We don't just have subject matter experts sitting there and labeling things, but by using the tool and by creating evals and creating RL environments and all of those different things, we're creating this new data asset that is then used to build an agent and do the job.
This kind of all leads to this idea of like the forward deployed engineer and like, what is that? And how it's become like, we just wrote this article about how it's the hottest, job in Silicon Valley. Thank you for your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I think I would like to tease out a little bit about like, what is a forward deployed engineer? You and I have talked a little bit about it, the spectrum of different roles that exist there, right? And, I think obviously there's the stuff that you've maybe learned over the last 12 months at scale, but also now just applying that to the rest of the market. Help us understand, the different types, maybe the way to evaluate those different roles, and then how you might think about building, your initial team.
So when I joined Scale, I thought that the forward deployed role was a consultant that bridged the gap between what we had in the platform and what they needed. And to some degrees, that is the job of a forward deployed engineer. But really, the mandate of the forward deployed engineer is to do that. You do need to say, okay, we have 60% out of the box, but that last 40%, maybe it's a data integration, it's a visualization, it's an agent that we haven't built yet. You do need to do that work. But you also need to have a keen eye and say, what are the things that we should bring back? What are the things that I can go back to my platform team and say, hey, this is super important. This is repeatable across a bunch of different customers. And if I had this, I would be 10x faster. At Scale, we break down the forward deployed role, not just to forward deployed engineers, which Palantir made famous, but we also have forward deployed product. That's the team that I lead, and forward deployed machine learning engineers or applied AI engineers. They all have different tasks. So the forward deployed engineer is doing kind of typical engineering work, right? This is data and building software. It could be full stack application, could be setting up infrastructure, that type of work. The forward deployed machine learning engineer, they're building agents. So a lot of their work is evals, it's diving into data, could be training models, understanding the problem really well, and then building machine learning tools to go solve it. And the forward deployed PM is really what a PM does in any job, which is they're the voice of the customer, they're defining their requirements, and most importantly, they're seeing around the corner to set an ambitious vision of what this could become. Because what we see oftentimes is that companies know that there's something to do with AI.
Yeah.
They're like, we know that AI should transform our business, but like, we don't think we're thinking about it right.
Yeah.
And we push them to say, what if you were to think way bigger? What if you were to throw away your assumptions of how you build today or how you do that process today and think of a super, AI native way of doing it? And that's really the role of the PM. It's partly to be like the chief product officer for AI at the company, and then really work with, the engineering team and the AI team to then say, how do we take this problem that we've understood, whether it's, a lawyer inside of a company trying to do contract review. We say like, okay, we understand how they do that process. And then we dive deep in evals, we dive deep in losses. We really go deep on the data to understand, okay, we built an agent. It's not really solving the core problem they have, even though maybe it solves our eval, but we have to really dive deep on it. And then we can bring those insights, build a better agent, bring that back into the platform, and then communicate to the C-suite and say, here's the opportunity. Like, here's how we can take this 10x bigger.
So it's kind of interesting to think about like that this role along that spectrum. And you've now tried to solve this for so many different types of job. What's interesting though is like, as you go into each one of these types of jobs, there's so much depth to what that person actually has to do, right? So like if you go into the legal use case, there's so much that someone has to do there. Or if you go into like the sales use case, there's so much you could build there. So one thing I found kind of challenging, and like I think we talk to companies all the time here about this, is like scope creep. And just like, okay, like when do we actually stop building, right? And I think if you're a young company and you're building a vertical solution, like how do you actually want to navigate that scope creep? And like, when is enough? And like, it's also challenging because, when you're navigating that scope creep, they're actually telling you something that maybe doesn't exactly look like this like AI native version of the future. It's more of like this like incremental step towards something that they can properly understand. So help us understand a little bit more about like how Scale's navigated that, like how your product team is navigated. Like, okay, there's this big vision of where we want to take it. There's probably incremental steps and building blocks of getting to that big vision. But like, how do you kind of sort through like what you want to build? And that probably then feeds into, do I actually need a machine learning forward deployed engineer? Do I need a, whatever type of role behind that?
So the reason I joined Scale, and the reason I thought it was such an interesting opportunity, is Scale is the overlap of AI expertise and Schlepp blindness. And, Paul Graham wrote this essay about Schlepp blindness. Yeah. I think it inspired Alex in many ways. Scale does the dirty work on data. And I really thought that we could bring that same ideology to this forward deployed motion, which is that sometimes you do need to do the stuff that doesn't feel like you're building on the frontier of AI. You got to write the data migration. You got to build the dashboard that communicates to the executive. You have to do this like last 20% of work to actually get the product or the experience across the finish line to show impact. And I think this is critical. Like, your job is not to build a product. Your job is to solve a problem. And that is what enterprises are going to expect. That is what's going to unlock 10x bigger contracts with them. Because if you say, hey, we have the best customer support agent and it has high CSAT and says, yeah, but it can't process returns. And it's like, okay, well, in order to go process returns, you have to go deal with this like real world system or this legacy software. And you're like, we don't want to deal with that. It's like, okay, not useful. And this is really the role, again, of the PM, is to say, like, what does the end-to-end solution look like? Which only 30% of it might involve AI. And the rest is that schlep that you just have to do to have an impact. And I think especially when you're dealing with enterprises that have all of this legacy stuff going on, it's super important to just, say, yeah, we will solve that problem. That said, you can't solve all of their problems. And oftentimes you have to push back and say, I think an internal team would be better off solving that problem. And here's how I think you should solve it. And we're going to help you do that, but we don't have the resources to do it. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, great, sounds good. We would love to, empower you to do this, because at least how we scope problems is like, we want to focus on the company's most important problems. We like to say, we focus on problems that get mentioned in earnings calls and move the stock price. And so if you do that, has C-suite attention, you say, yeah, of course, we're going to devote 20 people to go, solve this internal problem, as long as it's very clearly defined. I think the other way to think about it is, are you solving a problem that is compounding in the impact that it's having and leading to a bigger opportunity? So it's really not worth solving those annoying problems. Maybe they ask you to do something and you say, well, yeah, okay, well, let's say we do this. Like, we're really successful. Are we creating new data, automating part of the work that is going to lead us to a bigger and bigger problem over time? And if you're not, and it's just like, okay, once you solve that problem, it's kind of like put a bow on it and you're done, probably not that interesting. But if you, think that, hey, by solving this problem for this lawyer, then we're actually going to get into the contract negotiation, and then we get into procurement, and then we can get into the next big thing, and then we can automate an entire function or give leverage to an entire function. That is like the interesting stuff that you should really lean in and, double down on.
What's interesting to think about, like, as you talk through all those decisions you're making is, trying to find like the Goldilocks zone of like the right size customer. Right. And so maybe talk a little bit about like what you've learned here for scale, in terms of, okay, you go after like the largest companies in the world, but probably like the slowest, right? And you go after like maybe the smallest companies in the world, but probably the fastest, but like maybe they're not exactly the most lucrative and it probably doesn't fit for the business model. This is obviously a really fun moment in time where like every one of those companies wants to buy from you. And so maybe answer from the scale perspective, but then also like just thinking through, if you were, starting a new company, like how would you kind of balance like the right sized, Goldilocks zone of going and solving this? And then also talk a little bit about maybe what you might ignore.
We at Scale have like the luxury of having a portfolio of companies where we can say, we want to build relationships with the world's largest companies and the most important companies in the world, the most important governments, and really solve their biggest problems. And we think we can do that. And it takes them a lot longer. They have different security requirements and all of those types of things and vendor management, but it's worth it because we get to solve really big and important problems for them. And at the same time, we get to say, you know what, this is a bet where we think we're going to learn a lot. And we're not as focused on the brand. We're not as focused on the size of the contract, but we think they can be a great design partner that can allow us to move really quickly. And we try to like align those bets. So we say, you know what, this customer has a very similar set of problems to this really big opportunity at this bigger customer. And maybe we can retain more of the IP there. Oftentimes the big customers want to retain the IP. We're very happy to allow them to retain that IP because, it's core to their business. Like I said at the beginning, they have an advantage. They want to build in-house because they don't want to be the average of their peers and they want to own that. So oftentimes we work with them and, we're happy to do that and be great partners to them. But sometimes we do want to kind of have more of an out-of-the-box solution. And by working with a smaller customer, we can do that. I think the other like really interesting dynamic is that oftentimes big companies, especially big, very profitable companies, have technology teams internally. And one of the other things that we really think about is when we work with a company, what's the marginal value that we bring? And are we going to do something that's actually really impactful and driving a lot of value? So if we charge you, X, you should be getting 10X value versus the nearest alternative. And if we think that, this team actually, they have an internal team that's really well set up to solve this problem, or there's an external vendor that's really well set up to solve this problem, it's not as interesting for us. We only want to go after problems where like, we actually are the best in the world to solve this. And there are a lot of those problems that we really think that bringing kind of our AI expertise, having done this with, dozens of customers, we actually can be huge marginal value to them. But I think that's probably important it's important in all sales, important for all companies, which is like, go after the biggest need. And that biggest need, you also have to consider, especially with big companies, that everyone's running after AI. The tooling is getting better. Everyone is upskilling on how to use LLMs. You don't want to be competing against these internal teams, especially really capable internal teams.
Maybe just extending that though, down market, like to, the non-scales of the world, right? Because most startups, like they're not going out there and selling to the companies that are public today, right? They're probably starting a little bit smaller. And, one of the trickiest parts, I think, of building like one of these complex, non-deterministic products is it does require setup. Like it doesn't matter if you're selling to, time, or if you're selling to, time, the smallest company in the world, right? So each one of them needs some level of setup. And so I guess, what do you think that it's possible to run a little bit more of a hands-on approach to maybe not the smallest company in the world, but to like more of an SMB mid-market customer? Like, do you think that the way that the work is actually being delivered enables that? Or would you say that if you're in those kinds of markets, like maybe it's time to reevaluate and look at a different type of customer? Curious, like how you see the floor of this. And maybe another way of asking that is like, is there maybe like an ACV threshold that like people need to be, kind of targeting if they're going to market with a new solution?
I think that you really got to think about the buyer and then work out your business model and your motion after you understand like who the buyer is.
Yeah.
And so if you're selling to the CEO, CTO, founder of a company, and that company is very small and they're the decision maker, you have a very different business model than if you're trying to sell to, 7 layers of management and you have to, land and expand and do small things to prove success. If you have a single player product that applies to a lot of different companies, you can, take a product-led growth approach to the go-to-market. And maybe you don't have this forward deployed motion. I think you definitely can and should have a forward deployed motion for these smaller companies as well. And I think when a company's getting started, I wouldn't worry too much about the ACV as long as you feel like you're learning.
Yeah.
And I think, 5 years ago, you would just call like, hey, this is a design partner, and we just work closely with them. And then we bring those learnings, we solve their problems, we build it bespoke, we bring it back. I think the smaller the company and the smaller the customer, the more that you need to retain all of the IP and build it back into the platform. And the larger the company, you say, you know what, this is a $100 million contract, and a lot of it's bespoke work that maybe we don't think we're going to be able to bring back into the platform, but it's worth it because it's such a big contract and there's enough of it that's repeatable. We think that we have an advantage here. And if you're working with very small companies, it's like you can't deploy a very expensive engineering team, forward deployed engineering team against, a $20K contract. It's just not going to be profitable.
So there is some effective floor of this.
Definitely a floor. And I think if you're not selling to enterprises, it's difficult to think about this as a scalable business model.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it's difficult to think about it as a good way to learn.
Yeah.
And like definitely is a good way to learn. Just, talking to customers is a good way to learn. And forward deployed motions are just talking to customers with people that are builders. But I wouldn't probably do this for smaller contracts.
Yeah. Do you think the forward deployed team remains inside of these businesses as they scale? Like, if you just think about the historical example of like Salesforce or ServiceNow, like a lot of these businesses started with like services that were internal, at least services teams that were internal, right? Weren't called forward deployed, but they were called something else. And then over time, like obviously the ecosystem grows, Salesforce's ecosystem is actually, famously they do more in revenue than Salesforce does. Like, do you think that that's the same way that this will play out, or just because the nature of the work is changing, maybe like the nature of like what the company of the future looks like changes as well? Curious what you think about that.
It's an interesting question. I don't know that it ever goes, it depends. Obviously it depends. And there's some companies that today have a forward deployed motion that in the future will create a whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think there will be an ecosystem of consultants, but it's different than being an ecosystem of forward deployed engineers. And that, that difference is the point of the forward deployed engineer is to learn to bring it back into the platform.
Yeah.
And if you look at Palantir, for example, they still have a very robust forward deployed engineering team. And also they've enabled systems integrators and consultants to do that. They've worked with the big consulting companies just to train them up on Foundry and actually have them have that kind of pseudo forward deployed motion as well. I think that this idea of having this forward deployed in-house, it has a 5 to 10 year life because we just have so much software left to build.
Yeah.
And then if you look 5 to 10 years out, you say, are we going to have systems integrators or are we going to have agents do this work? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we will have a ton of leverage over implementation and customization via coding agents and, via all those things. So it's hard for me to think that in 10 years, there's going to be a super robust systems integrator ecosystem.
Because you don't know
probably agents will just do it.
Yeah. We hope so. Okay, so let's say that you're now working at one of these small companies. You're not at scale. Let's just like hypothetical, and you're setting up this forward deployed team for the first time. What are maybe the profiles that you're trying to target in on? Like, are there characteristics of an employee, an ideal employee that you're looking for? Just talk through like the way that you might build this team and like the initial role across that like spectrum that you're trying to hire for. And maybe it's different, depending on the vertical you're in. So talk a little bit about how you might set up this team for the first time.
Yeah. I think the number one thing is they need to be good in front of customers. That kind of maybe goes without saying, but you're working very closely with the customers. And, there's this like kind of caricature of the Silicon Valley engineer that's like very hard to work with, but they're a 10x engineer. Those people should be on your platform team and not on your forward deployed team. In terms of what we look for the PMs on my team, I really think of this as a very unique role, which is part PM, it's part founder because you're trying to go 0 to 1. You have to have executive presence because you have to be able to pitch the AI vision for the company, pitch this ambitious vision. You got to be really steeped in data and really understand AI because I think people that don't have a data background, they don't understand how to build probabilistic software, which is very different than building deterministic software for a variety of reasons. And so people that want to get their hands dirty and they have to look at losses, they got to go into the evals and say, you know what, we got this wrong. I'm annotating why. I'm going back to the subject matter expert. I'm asking them how we would have done it correctly, like all of that type of stuff. And then they need to be able to, be organized and all those types of things, right? So it's like kind of a unicorn role, which has been very interesting to build a team around. But there are a lot of people that want to do it. I think it's like a factory for founders, whether or not it's in the product role or it's in the forward deployed engineering role or AI role, because these are people that are just doing customer discovery while they're building, which is like what being a founder is like. So that's really what I would think about is curious, product-minded, empathetic people that also have the skill set that you need, whether that's product, AI, or engineering. And if you are not that, then there's probably other roles. But that role is super important to just be curious and hungry. I think you don't need as much experience. Oftentimes, I think younger or people that are newer in their career, they don't have some of the biases of how they used to build. And so they can come in and just be really hungry and curious. And they have the platform or the service or the tool that they're building, they're trying to implement as a foundation, but they're not like the architect of the entire system. They're implementing and doing that last mile with the customer. And so just like getting people that are willing to hop on a plane, that's actually really important. Sitting with the customer, flying to 6 hours away and saying, I'm going to spend 3 days with you is invaluable. It speeds you up 3 weeks. It has to be people that are down for that, down for that journey.
Yeah. But if they're 24 years old and they don't have any experience, and let's just say you're operating in like some you've operated in legal, I think, at scale, or pick a vertical, right, that has like some level of like expertise. Maybe you have to go to school for it. There's a whole bunch of acronyms that this 24-year-old probably doesn't know. How does that person navigate that? Like, have you seen them do that well? Like, do you necessarily need to pair that person maybe with someone else on the team that has that level of experience? Like, how do you think about that when you spin up one of these new verticals?
Yeah, we deploy a whole team against it. So, as I said, we have PM, software engineer, machine learning engineer. We also have an engagement manager who usually has a background in management consulting that like understands how to do like the customer relationship. And, because we're working with larger customers, we have a bigger account team. You have to have the credibility and you have to have the gravitas, especially if you are trying to pitch and look for expansion within the company. If you're trying to pitch this vision, coming in, depends on the customers. If you're doing this forward deployed motion to, other companies in San Francisco and there's other 24-year-old people there that are the people building it, they may not look at you the same way as if you're going to, a place that is not as used to working with, young, hungry engineers. So it's definitely, dependent on who your customers are and what the motion is. You have to become an expert in the industry. And that's why I was saying it's such a unique role where you have to be super curious. I think one of the things that I've really benefited from is using Gemini and ChatGPT to learn about industries. Like, you have to come super prepared to every meeting and become an expert, using deep research, going deep, calling your friends, and saying, hey, you're a lawyer and I'm going to talk to this IP lawyer. Can we spend 30 minutes together to really understand the problem? I don't know this jargon. Can you explain to me how this works? So we do that a lot at scale. We have people at scale that have come from every different industry under the sun, and we'll be working with a new customer, and we'll say, hey, has anyone ever worked in financial due diligence, in private equity or at a big accounting firm? And they'll say, oh yeah, I actually used to work there. And we'll say, hey, can you come join this call with us? Can you spend 3 hours with the team, really understand the workflow? And so it just takes that work. And this is part of that Schlepp blindness. Yeah. It's like, you just got to do the work. You got to really come prepared. Like, it's not like, roll out of bed, show up 5 minutes late. It's like, you have to be on, you have to show up in force, and you have to know what you're talking about. Yeah. If you don't, whatever. I would say the one other thing is, you also just have to be humble and say, hey, you guys are the experts. We want to deeply understand that with you. Yeah. Here's what we know about. We know about how to build performant AI. We know how to build good UX that allows that to actually capture the knowledge and for people to use it and whatever, and not trying to oversell. Yeah. I mean, that's always important as well.
How does the forward deployed team interact with sales? Because they're driving so much of the, obviously the ACV and the revenue growth for these accounts, and they're selling in many respects. You just kind of said executive presence going in and talking to the customer, but you also have a sales team, right? So is there a compensation structure that works best? How do these teams interact? Would love to hear a little bit more about how you think that might be, best done at a growing company.
So the forward deployed team, product is very involved with sales. So we join before we sign. We help scope the problem, especially when it's not exactly clear what the problem we're solving is. We want to make sure that we're solving the right problem. There's a big business need. We can get access to the users. We can get access to the data. We have the technology that we think. So we, project out 3 months. We think at least in 3 months, the technology will be good enough. The models will be good enough. So product gets involved very early in the sales process. The salespeople are also technical. To work at scale in sales, it's not exactly the same as, working at any other software company. You actually have to understand the technology as well. In terms of compensation structure, I'm not an expert, but I will say that I think in the forward deployed motion, the goal is to build a repeatable process through your customers. And having that orthogonal to your go-to-market incentives is important, because there's a healthy tension when you have that, and you can say, hey, actually, we're not just focused on the size of the contract, because when you do consulting, you can have very big contracts, but if you're selling people, it's not really the most valuable thing. When you're doing this forward deployed motion, you're saying, hey, we're using this as a wedge into big customers, and we're using this as a way to learn. And that should be very orthogonal to your sales incentives. I have one question, which is, the title of your post was trading margin for Moat.
Yeah.
Right? Do you think that this forward deployed motion is fundamentally low margin?
So I think that's a really interesting question. And it kind of gets to the question that I asked you on, do you believe that the nature of the work that these people are doing has changed, right? Because if the way that you can deliver the services work is actually much more scalable than it was, 12 months ago or 24 months ago, you obviously need fewer people to do more work. And so it kind of gets back to that point of I said, okay, maybe 10 years ago, these consulting businesses were growing linearly over time because they had to hire new people. And that's the only way you could unlock more product development or more customer development. And so now I think you're probably in the in-between where a lot of the kind of primitives of this more technologically enabled future for these consulting firms is it's currently happening. But I would assume that most of the businesses have not built out all that tooling, right? You talk about the data analyst or, the integrations that you have to build, or maybe it's some kind of modern kind of browser-based, new age RPA experience that allows you to get around some hairy integration problem. Or even just hey, a customer support agent that allows your customer to ask some questions of that deployed team. All of these things would have in the past taken a human some amount of time to do, and it would have required you to hire a bigger team. I don't think most small companies have built any of that. I think it's very easily built though, right? And it's just a matter of people hours, and basically resource spend and money.
Soon GPU hours.
Yeah, soon GPU hours. And so I guess the reason I said trading margin for Moat is if you can go in my opinion, if you can go in and you can start to own whether it's that mission critical context, right? Whatever the atomic unit of work is within some critical workflow, as you're taking, jobs away from whatever that system of record is, and now you're building this layer that lives on top of it, right? That's obviously very complicated to build. If you could start to own that extremely valuable data, or that extremely valuable layer, that I believe is where all of the, kind of future value for these businesses will be built. And so if it requires you being a, air quote, low margin business to start to own that layer, that I think is going to be the most valuable, thing that you can have in this this future of 5 years from now when everything's much more, agentic or AI enabled. And so I think that the problem is if, especially if you're a larger company and you have a built out finance team, or if you're a smaller company and you have someone on your, it's an investor or board member and they're looking at your company and they're like, hey, product-led growth companies, they are much better. You should have fewer people that are going out and delivering solutions to the customer. And in doing so, it allows you to be an 80% gross margin business or an 85% gross margin business. And great, you look like one of the great darling PLG companies of the last 15 years. I think that's a tremendous mistake. I think it's actually probably the biggest mistake you can make right now. Because right now, there is this chance to go in and say, oh my God, there are these multi-million-dollar accounts or whatever it is. On a relative basis, there's 80% of your software spend goes to these few vendors. There's the chance to go in and build a better version of that, a 10x better version of that. And so I would sacrifice, I don't know if it's every bit of margin. I don't know if I would go negative margin, but I would sacrifice a lot to go in there and own that. And then over time, you're going to be able to do all the stuff I said, which is basically build all those primitives. And those are going to be, I think, the most defensible businesses. And the trick now is basically figuring out and why it's so fascinating to be chatting with you today is how do you go hire the right people, right? How do you then build the right process? Because you do need it to be scalable enough to grow and attract investors, to grow and attract, more customers. You need to deliver the experience at a rate that makes sense for those customers. That's why I call it the trading margin remote. It's this is the moment in time to go basically build that net new layer that doesn't exist. And whoever gets there first, I think has all of the context and all of the data that will allow them to build in, all of the, 7 power type nodes that you want.
Yeah, I think that, this era of triple, double, all
yeah,
that type of stuff. It's rewrite the rules.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing, well, it's two things. One is I think you just have to be very honest and very sober about your revenue when you do that. And you say, hey, we were able to get to $10 million in revenue, but it's consulting-ish revenue.
Yeah.
Our repeatable aspect is 2 million. And the important thing is the metric that we care about is the number of, the economic value we've created or the workflows, or if we were to switch to value-based pricing, which we think we can do with our next customer, here's how we would be able to price. And just being honest with your investors, honest internally, what you're trying to grow, because, you'll grow what you measure.
Yeah.
Just measure the right things and make sure that you're not have these vanity metrics around revenue.
Yeah. I think that's a huge mistake that a lot of the early stage companies can make. Is you go out there and again, you're oh, I don't want to charge for implementation. These big companies, they won't like that. They just want to pay one flat fee, right? When in reality, if you go to most companies and you say, I'm going to go set up this amazing thing for you, they're so accustomed to paying for that.
Totally.
That is the model, right? And so going in there and actually getting paid for that work, you're getting paid to go deliver a service that ultimately will create some very durable value for you. So I think that that's one kind of I think big mistake that people make today is just not charging for implementation.
Or charging not enough.
I've
been amazed after joining Scale, realizing, wow, you can charge
a lot
more than I could at a startup.
Well, it's also you can use that implementation cost, what people will pay for services, that will help you uncover what you actually are creating in terms of value. Right? This is an ACV discovery, arrow. And that should basically be informing okay, we have no idea how to price this right now, right? If I go in there today and there's some corpus of humans that are doing some sort of data entry work that now they can go do something that's way higher value than that. The easiest way to think about it is okay, it's some fraction of the cost of hiring those people, but there's all the management costs. It's what does that then unlock in terms of revenue growth? And so if you can go in there and you can say, actually, hey, instead of me going in and pricing this at some number that is associated with the cost around them, it's actually, here's the implementation costs I'm thinking. You can kind of start to uncover, is this, a, level 1 fire, level 2 fire, level 5 fire, and a little bit on the priorities. The other thing that I think is really interesting about services and something that people need to really weigh is, okay, you can trade margin for moat if you're actually trading margin for moat.
Right.
It
you
has
to build the moat.
Yeah, you have to be going after the right thing. And so I think it's really easy right now because there is so much demand. Every enterprise is saying, I will give you money for AI, right? And basically really every company, right? And so it's so easy, I think, today to get pulled off track from whatever this vision is of the thing that you want to build. And so I know I'm talking in the abstract, but I think it's really important to stay hyper-focused on whatever that is and whatever that layer is on top of whatever the most, critical kind of asset for the rest of the business is. And so, I don't know, is there a number which it wouldn't be worth going after the customer ID for a big, retail company? I don't know. I'd probably give up all of my margin to go and get that piece of data, or like the policy information for an insurance carrier. But it's easy though if you go into that and all of a sudden you like end up in some like back office function that has no relation to that, but they're willing to pay you some money. It's just really easy to say yes, 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 and you end up in the wrong spot. So I think those are really important trade-offs to balance.
I think it's also interesting in the context of there's a lot of companies that are saying we're going to sell dollars for dimes when it comes to tokens.
Yeah.
And it's another one where you have to be very careful, and it can be worth it if you're, trading margin for Moat, but on the model wrapping side. But I think it's a similar type of thing where you have to say, like, is this a wedge into system of record, system of work?
Yeah.
And forward deployed is the same, which is it a wedge into the thing that I actually care about? And if it is, then it's totally worth it in both of those cases. And if not, then you're just like creating these vanity revenue metrics that are not going to scale.
Do you have a most controversial take or like a hottest take in AI right now?
Yeah. I think that I would say my hottest take is I think the right way to think about Foundation Labs is that they're like movie studios. And what I mean by that is they invest a ton of money in blockbusters that have a relatively short time span to pay them back. So you think about, Marvel, you're investing in the Avengers and you invest $1 billion in it. And then it maybe pays you back over the next 18 months. And then it's pretty irrelevant after that. But you are building that franchise brand. And so that, the GPT class of models, GPT-3 drafts off of, GPT-2 and 4, whatever, 5. But it's like going to be pretty irrelevant later. And, there's a back catalog and you still use it a little bit, whatever. And I think it's, it's just very similar. Like then you're able to turn, that franchise maybe turn into a video game, and then maybe it is more like software. But actually right now, the model companies look more like a content studio than they do like a software company.
Yeah.
What's your hottest take?
Okay, so I think my hottest take is that like revenue teams should be saying no as much as, if not more, than they're saying yes, which I know is very strange for like a venture capitalist to be like, don't grow. And I guess I'm not really saying exactly that, but I think that if you're, considering how you want to go and like basically grow your business, right now the most dangerous thing you can do is just like say yes to basically every customer. And I think it's really easy to go 0 to 10 right now, or 0 to 50 or whatever it might be. But like these like sins of non-focus, or the sins of going in the wrong direction when it comes to product, they'll come back to bite you at some point. Like you'll have to pay for those. And so I think that like the best and most durable businesses are thinking really critically about, do I want to say yes to this customer right now? And what does this then enable for me? And so I think that like, it's hard for me too. Like it kind of crushes me on the inside as a salesperson to say like, say no to some revenue. But the wonderful part is like, there's so much out there and you can go so fast. So it's a really exciting time. This was a riot. Love doing this with you.
This was great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so many great learnings on forward deployed. Obviously, it's just tremendous what you guys have all built at scale on the application side. And thanks for trading notes on the forward deployed motion. So this was so fun, man. Thank you.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks for having me.